Sorry.
shape social realities,
Yeah.
and how an anti-microfascism can shape social realities in different ways. How can we begin by thinking through, yeah, like a moment of such accelerating downsurgency, such accelerating momentum away from networks of care, away from popular cultures that achieve some kind of trans individuation or a different kind of sociogenesis. Um, yeah, how do we how do we think about your last chapter in this kind of context? Is my general question. And Michael, if you wanted to start, if you wanted to help out a little bit by connecting the necropolitics a little bit to that
Well,
last chapter,
I first
that.
of all, I have to thank Jack. I went to the word exchange, and I saw Alexander, and I mentioned that we were doing the book in a seminar. He gave me the essential Jack Bratich oil.
Ah,
So
the micro
really
anti-fascist
happy.
tool.
I mean, everybody's looking at me when I walk in now. I feel like I'm, Frank Sinatra on the Hudson. I'm just kidding, right? So, yeah, thank you
Oh,
so much. It's really good, though.
oh,
I've had several people look at you ought to market this.
I think, yeah, I'll just respond. That's really
I
nice.
mean, I needed to break the ice given what's going on in the
Oh
world
my God.
a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, yeah. But great.
Uh,
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
yeah,
Tell me
well,
the ingredients on
it's
this.
always what a wonderful surprise that is. I hadn't expected it. So yes, um, I'll just do a quick, as much as
Here
I
it
can.
is, folks. If you're interested, it comes in a nice little bottle. I have it here. Yeah.
Yep. Right now, each one is singular insofar as
Oh,
so
wow.
when I
Okay.
was writing the book, I mean I like essential oils. I like making them. I like also like I like
Right.
blending them. I'm into fragrances. So I had a writing version of that, and so at some point I can't remember. Yeah, I think it was the Word is Change reading group when they started. I was like, you know what? I'm really into just making little things. Why not just make some for readers, right? And so anyone who's at the reading group would just get one of these, right? I mean, if you're in the reading group, or and then I left a bunch with Alexander at the Anarchist Book Fair, and I said, look, anyone who buys one, just like give them one, right? So
Right.
and each one again is singular because they all contain a little bit of the one that I used when I was writing it. So that's in common, and then there are other common ingredients. But I think because each of those, the bottle you have is a uh, 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 is a reused bottle, so there's always a trace, a little bit of whatever was in it before. You can never fully really clean these out. Anyway, so each one
Okay.
has its own trace of the past
No,
as well.
thank
So,
you so much. And I thought it would, show another dimension of
ah,
your practices, your social practices. And
oh, thank you,
like
thank
I
you, thank
said,
you.
I would buy it in the store. It's the best thing I've seen since Paco Rabanne. What was it called? I forgot the name of the thing that used to have this very nice lemon flavor. Anyway.
Funny. Wow, wow. Well, yeah, if I don't have any more, but if any of you can go through that, word has changed. I'm
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
Alexander will give you
yeah.
some.
I'll ask Alexander. Yeah, I was just going to mention. Speaking of Stanley of Aronowitz,
Hmm.
um, uh, I pick up here underneath a little bit of your text on the necropolitics that there is a kind of Reichian hyphen, Deleuzian, Guattarian moment, right? That is very, in some ways, very important for our time today, just to situate it for people, because few people know that Reich was kicked out of both the international psychoanalytic movement and also kicked out of the Communist Party. He had the dubious distinction of both, but I think it was a good distinction given where the organizations were at the time. But I just wanted to ask you, in some ways, Reich did not believe in the death drive. This was one of the arguments with Freud, and I wanted to ask you too. Did you see? Do you have that kind of, if you will, presupposition at work here underneath this going forward? Because Freud wrote Beyond the Pleasure Principle, and as a scholar that Lacan and others, Laplanche, went back to this very actively, right? When they wrote books like Life and Death and Psychoanalysis, you know, the death drive, of course, being prominent, the old struggle between Eros and Thanatos, and especially in Western civilization or and culture. So I'm just kind of curious. I mean, I'm yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, yeah.
Yeah, and and I am not as well versed in this as I'd like to be. I think what I found is that, even though the death drive can be organized socially, and even in Freud, right? It's not just an internal impulse and a psychological sort of feature. I feel like I sense the way that was like being deployed typically, maybe not with Reich so much, but um, was I don't know, it was some kind of like collective impulse that I felt was a little too, and maybe this is just me not really getting into the details of it, a little too amorphous
Mhm.
uh, in its in the way that it's socially deployed. Meaning, like, sometimes it was like, oh, if it is, at least in the kind of Oedipal sense of Freud, if it is some kind of a desire to return to the oceanic, right? If it was actually a return, like a frustrated turn, almost uh, to the maternal, right? To the imagine, to self dissolution completely. Then I'm not as drawn to it. But if we can show how something like that can then be maneuvered towards action or towards a series of relations, I'm I'm more intrigued. And
Mhm.
But I don't know I don't know how much I needed the principle of the death drive to find ways that the flight from life can be sort of seen anthropologically,
Mhm.
and then make that claim that it's like the necro orientation of that um, comes from something other than either an Oedipal drive or Oedipal base drive, or something that maybe even I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, so like how much of the death drive, this maybe you all can tell me, like needs the family unit to make sense of its, or is it like more of an ontological condition, even in Freud or Reich? Um,
That's a good,
uh,
very good question. Of course, it's very prominent in Heidegger, being towards death, which isn't a
yeah.
drive. I've told this story to part of the people here in the group. Lacan and Freud excuse me, Lacan and Heidegger, that was my slip, were driving in Paris in Lacan's Jaguar. And the joke was Mrs. Heidegger's in the back seat, the real Nazi in the family, Elfrida, and Sylvie Lacan. And so Mrs. Heidegger turns to Sylvie Lacan and says, "Can you ask the good doctor to slow down?" Because Lacan loved racing through the streets. So Sylvie Lacan in French, says to Lacan, "She wants you to slow down. Please do." Of course, Lacan speeds up. So the joke was death drive meets being towards death, right? So anyway, it is an ontological, except when it comes to industrial assembly lines or fine-tuned
Right.
cars. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
I just thought I'd raise this. I mean, I was reminded, I think what you've done, at least for my own work, we're going to be doing a Marxist summer school this summer. I'm going to do the anti-Oedipus sections of it, and sessions on the old Freudo-Marxism and how you undo that to make it more powerful. And I really love the thing I love about your book is that I read Anti-Oedipus as a great experiment, right?
Mm.
In creativity that goes way beyond, and you use platform and the thing. I mean, they don't really have that language back then, but the experimentation was really there, in a sense. It really was beyond, if you will, the aggressive principle or the death drive in some ways. Creativity. Yeah, and a much more Nietzschean affirmation, going forward than the same old, dynamics of the death ride, which can be very mechanistic in the society, as you know, through social relations. Yeah, yeah, in so many ways, and yeah. And as Foucault once said, and I really agree with him, the import of Freud was really he was able to transfer the madness from the asylum in the 19th century to the couch. He points this out very well in the early parts of the history of sexuality. And yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, I really I just wanted to say I really see I think some of the most creative work that came out of the anti-Oedipus group and its continuation in your work. I wanted to just mention that. And but I but I do see in a way the old debates playing out between is masochism a secondary drive?
Right.
Is the death drive secondary, right? To
Yeah, yeah,
in the
yeah,
one.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, and those traces of those debates are certainly there, and I'm aware of some. And at some point, I'm like, okay, how much do I revisit them and then
right,
sort of stake a claim? Or, I mean, even in that paragraph that we just pointed to, I was like, oh, I realize this. I often go to Thevalite and say, like, well, okay, let's look at how he does it, because he seems to do it in a very innovative way
yes, I agree. Yeah.
of like reading something off of these artifacts. Um, and turning it into a kind of a desiring production, right? That the desire to massacre and to slaughter that the Freikorps have in their poems and their drawings. It's like he's like, well, it's there. I mean, how much what do we need to do to turn that into to make sense of it as a desiring production, like a desire to make reality devivified rather than to just something about escaping or a collective withdrawal from reality. What I liked
Mhm.
about how he sort of resolves it is like, yeah, it's almost like, I mean, the Lacanian speeding up, right? It's like, oh no, we don't, not only do we not slow down or just like, or dissociate in the moment or just like not even pay attention, but we're going to accelerate the thing, right? Like,
Right, right, right.
and I laugh because it's like it's kind of absurd, but to think that, but the idea there is that it's almost like what are the material, visible effects and traces of whatever this drive is. I mean, we can read it off of text, we can read it,
Right.
like we see the effects. So, what is the social organization of either fear, which is what he points to, right? That the fear
Sure.
of women translates as fear of blood, which then translates as into we need to produce women and blood in a different combination through the
Right,
massacre, right?
right.
But anyway, so yeah, I appreciate, yeah, those again, those lingering things are there. It's and I struggle just over time, like with like how much
Sure.
to become or like revisit the nuances versus putting something to work, if that makes sense. So, which was again,
Oh,
as you
it
said,
does.
the
Right.
Oedipus is an experiment, right? This is what they're like. What does the book do? Like, what do you want to do with it? How do you want to have it to move,
Yeah.
rather than even be like correct, right? Or, but
I
uh,
see you as part of the third chair at the Laborde Clinic. When they were reminiscing, you obviously know the story that Felix was having trouble with writing, and Deleuze said, "Well, we'll just free associate all in the day," and they'd sit out in the grounds of the asylum, the Laborde Clinic, which was a very advanced clinic back in the day. So
yeah, yeah. Well, when they said, what is we get together, there are already many of us, or something like
many
that,
of them. Right,
right?
that's great too. You have that going. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. And so I'd be happy to be that third chair, to be
Yes,
part of that multiple that they're
indeed. Right.
always invoking. But also, yeah, but also to go back, I mean, I was trying to think about what you were getting at. So if is it like you were asking, like, okay, well, what other kinds of either preventions of that version of the necropolitical
Right.
in everyday life, or other forms of I mean, I talk about reexistence in there, like the kind of the Latin American feminists, the notion and the idea that it's not just affirming life as some kind of, untouched essence, but it itself needs, a kind of social composition or a social organization of life itself. So what does it mean to kind of, do that as an everyday practice? So, I might have forgotten some of the other things you were saying, trying to tie.
I was struggling through it a little bit. I guess the I'm thinking about what short circuits anti-microfascism in everyday life, right? Like, why do we all here in this group probably have in common the experience of being in environments where, say, microfascist orientations dominate. And we would very much like to intervene, very much like to retell a narrative, very much like to introduce a different perspective. I've been dealing with this in social environments my entire life, right? And like trying to understand both what is this dominant narrative, what is my desire to short circuit it, and what is getting in my way of producing an alternative to this microfascist narrative, and like how do we think through getting from where we are now to as comfortable being micro anti-fascists as microfascists appear to be being microfascists in our environments. Does that make sense? More sense to everybody? Maybe if we could think it
Yeah,
through.
maybe others. Yeah, I mean, others who haven't spoken. Carolyn, Beryl,
Yeah,
Leslie.
please, everybody jump in with any questions. I don't mean to.
Because what do you think? Yeah, I like this idea of what the blocks are, what the obstacles are. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and then how do we think through like or mobilize your sort of the conceptual world that you build here to narrate that, right? To kind of strategize anti-fascist groupuscules, and anti-fascist tactics concretely in the trivial, in those moments of pop culture where these forms of sovereignty are constantly emerging and regenerating, and here we are individual and hopefully as time goes on trans individuated anti-microfascists who can find each other in everyday life and share strategies and like fight back moment to moment kind of a thing. Because I don't know personally
I mean,
how to do it. I've told Jack, I've shared a couple stories around this group. I tell stories about family stories about holidays and stuff like that. My initiation into a fraternity and conversations around poker tables where I sit and like the commonality in, I don't know if you guys have caught on to this in these stories that I like telling about myself, is these are the stories that like in my history that stand out to me and become relevant. Like these moments where I lived through these situations where like I was in an environment that was until that moment fully automatic for me. And something about it like just tipped over and like made me recognize that I was in a fucked up environment. So like going through the initiation of a fraternity where, by the way, we had to toast the mother during the ceremonies where we were getting drunk almost, I swear to God, almost. So we drank almost to death, toasted the mother while we were doing that. And then we're stripped naked in a basement in the dark and rolled around in garbage and refuse and death, and then it's fascinating, Jack. The pattern of initiation ritual is really, really neat. And then stuff like that. And more recently, I'm at a poker table and a whole bunch of people are, agreeing that it's really cool to be misogynistic to people who work around the casino and stuff like that. And like in these moments when I'm 19 and in the fraternity trying to figure it out, when I'm 47 and at a poker room and trying to figure out, the commonality is like there is a contest being had here, right? Like this is popular culture. This is the trivial as a terrain of struggle of like what kind of reality will be shaped here? What kinds of social relations are going to be asserted, accepted, participated in, and living anti-microfascism is incredibly freaking difficult. Partly because we don't have like a common sense conceptual universe that we can draw from in those moments and know we're sharing it with others, right? Like there's no shared consciousness. And so that again, I'm wandering through this, but Jack, one of the reasons I wanted to work through this book, one of the reasons I find it most valuable is it's a contemporary attempt to create the kinds of concepts that we're going to need if we're going to form a kind of collective anti-fascist consciousness that isn't currently emergent. We'll need your book and lots of other books like it and lots of conversations where we forge these concepts. And so I wonder if anybody or what you think, Jack, has like takeaways from this book that feel like this is going to help me during the holidays. You know what I mean? When I know these conversations are going to come up, I'm going to have this in mind, and
Just
it's going to
making
help
a
me out.
stocking stuffer.
Stocking
Eating
stuffers.
stocking, overnight. Guess what I got you? Let's read this at the turkey dinner.
I will certainly put the oil,
And to put the oil as an extra. Yeah, that's right.
yeah. No, the factory will start in my own factory into of one. But I mean, I want to hear what other folks. I just wanted to say one thing about these spaces that you're talking about, David. And I have a friend, some of you know him, Stephen Shakaitis, who's also reported to me over the years, or like a couple of years ago. He belongs to a WhatsApp group that's about like soccer dads, football dads, right? Because he's in the UK, and just how that site, it's not, when I say site, I mean WhatsApp group, and of those dads, and how much of that kind of misogyny, jokey memes stuff was just like cruising around there. And he was just like, I don't know what to do. Like, and I think, I mean, this is about our historic incapacities as men, right? To be able to, in those moments, understand the difference or understand a different way of being together as men, meaning like being in public or being, it's like, so, I mean, obviously, feminist, consciousness raising was a structured effort to take isolated experiences and bring them together, bring people together, talk, share about what's going on in your household, your domestic relationship, right? All the things that isolate us from each other. So we now, I mean, it's not just that, but that was certainly a pivotal moment from the last, 50 to 60 years that has set something in place. Women's historic informal networks of thinking about precisely like the discomfort in those moments of like not just repeating, the initiation ritual, not just or not just sort of. And I'm with you. It's not. I'm not. I haven't figured this out. So I'm not, this is not a position of like knowing how in difficult moments, what kind of like courage or something else it takes to say like, no, hey, my temporary poker squad that we happen to be at this table, right? Like this is unacceptable. I mean, it's like, okay, there's that version of an intervention, but I think more than that is like something that we need to be talking to each other, which we haven't for a long time. Yeah, like not just you and I, but like, as not just as men, but as on trying to understand that very position of being someone who's kind of almost surprised at the degree to which we find ourselves in these recruitment moments, even if it's informal, the presumption that the meme, that makes fun of a prime minister candidate, is just like tolerable. So I mean, I'm aware that like men are just talking about what it means to be men like here, um but I do think that we being as men also need to figure that out, but not we don't have the resources necessarily to know all that, but it's a project, and I wish I had more kind of examples at hand of that kind of it's not even consciousness raising from, I mean, that's the manosphere, but the form of like desubjectification versions of this that I mean, it was tried at some point, right, in the late 80s, early 90s, the Iron John stuff, but that quickly turned also into the settings for the manosphere, right, about men getting together, right? Okay, Beryl, you're nodding your head. A
Yes.
familiar history.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean that thing of the fear of intervening, and it applies in a sort of feminist context. This sort of what? Don't you have a sense of humor? We're just joking, and if you keep pushing, you're kind of spoiling sociability for others. And I guess it's the same thing with challenging people on polite anti-Semitism. If you pull people up, it kind of it jars, and you turn yourself into this difficult person. And I think that's probably what we need to get around. How we get around it, I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, that was, I mean, Sarah Ahmed's Killjoy, right? The feminist
yeah,
Killjoy.
yeah, yeah.
Precisely, right? And I mean, what we don't have enough of, I mean, from men, about men to men, is there's also a feminist Killjoy that men can be, right? And have to,
Mm,
be, right? So, that like, yeah, we can't, and not just like laughing politely with whatever, dominant humor
mm,
is happening. But challenging it too, like not just not laughing, but saying like, hey, anyway. So yeah, I mean, what I think is happening, at least in the States right now, some of that it's not necessarily around gender, but it's around calling out, as you say, like so in the comedy world right now, I mean, at least the last month, one of the more famous comedian podcasters, one of the founders of some kind of podcasting, Mark Maron, has basically gone very deliberately. He's ended his podcast, but now he's on all these other podcasts talking about the comedy world and the right wing dimension of it, and so there's a kind of calling out that's happening in that world, which is I don't know where it's going, but in terms of like
mm,
what's happening at the level of audiences and users and that, but it to me because it has been such a pivotal place for the kind of yeah it's not quite Mannerbundian, but it's certainly the kind of gathering of men through humor
yeah.
over against others in misogynistic, racist, anti-Semitic
Mm,
many ways. The Rogan sphere,
mm,
and generally speaking, in the way that it was tied to Trump. But I think is something interesting happening in those cracks that is worth paying attention to. Again, pop culture as a space of contestation, and not just reproduction of dominant narratives and ideology.
Makes me think very quickly of, and if anybody else wants to jump in, I hope somebody will. Yeah, Mark Maron, I've seen him talking specifically about Rogan's Club and how like comics who work Rogan's Club are expected to do anti-trans jokes. And like
mm,
Maron is going through specifically, like if you're going to show up at Rogan, everybody knows like at his club, these are the jokes that play, these are the jokes you have to do. I'm thinking also of the 50 Cent documentary about Diddy that just came out, and like these pop culture moments where like one person in pop culture, big name, an A-lister is calling out. Well, Mark Maron's a B-lister, I guess, but is calling out another big A-lister for some sort of violence or some sort of long-term practice of degradation, misogyny, rape, and all sorts of weird shit. And
Oh
Sean
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and maybe you're also referring to this, but like, yeah, uh, anyway, and I mean, some of the kind of more leftist-oriented podcasts, meaning like comedians, I should say first, they're comedians and they're podcasters, are starting to just speak more, right? And speak out more
mm,
and in ways that like are um, precisely about what you're saying. I mean, there was a really wonderful moment because these are two friends. Um, uh, Stavros Halkias, a comedian of Greek descent, Greek American descent from Baltimore, progressive beliefs, funny. I mean, you'll recognize him if you saw him. Anyway, had a friend on, Jordan Jensen, who's also like a popular emerging comedian, and she was trying some of her material on his show because she was about to go to Austin to work this club. And he calls her out. He's like, "Why are you doing like why I mean, you're not even like this. Like, why are you testing out this kind of like you're blaming women for for sexism because they reproduce it, but you're blaming women for it. And then it's just like, oh yeah, they all have like, I forget what he called it, like not anti-trans brain, but something like that. Like when you go to Austin, if you're a comedian, like you have to pick up this framework because that's what plays, not both to the audience, but then to the seeming power brokers, right, in the comedy world, so they can move up in their success. But anyway, but sorry, I'm down to a minor detail, but again, this also went viral. This is a viral moment. We might not all be aware of it because things that go viral in like smaller subcultures and
mm,
communities, but they create controversies, and I think it's interesting to see again, yeah, some of these cracks happening. What do we do with our own world of cracks and where that might be happening is something worth thinking about. Yeah, I mean, but it's hard to have like a general program about it because I think
Mm.
we're all still caught up in the little, if not bubbles and not niches exactly, but definitely our own affinities where we don't necessarily are always translating that to each other. Anyway, yeah, but
Yeah, it's really interesting to think of pop culture as like a place to mine language sometimes for anti-patriarchy, anti-microfascism, and like there are, and like so for folks who aren't, it's a big thing at the moment. The rapper 50 Cent spent 10 years putting together a documentary destroying Sean Combs. And there are a lot of people, figures in hip hop who have, including 50 Cent, who have, as a result of this, had the chance to say anti-patriarchal and anti-misogynist and anti-sexist things in public because they're critiquing Sean Combs. And so, like, if we're looking at popular culture for language, for things to pick up, like the Mark Maron discourse or the podcast discourse that you're talking about, this anti-Sean Combs discourse has elements of like a popular, widespread, mainstream anti-rape discourse and anti-misogyny discourse, and there are things to pull down into our sphere sometimes, I think. Do you know what I mean? So like in a Me Too sort of moment when pop culture sometimes at a high level gives us things that we can then operationalize strategically, I guess, in the micro level maybe.
what I really like about that example, a couple of things. One is, yeah, this is like men calling out other men, which is like in public, quite important, right? As a kind of, more of yeah, again, a step, like saying like, okay, it's not just about, complaining women and beleaguered men, and that becomes the frame for understanding like, anti-patriarchal sentiments, but it's like, so that's one thing. And the other part is like, it's also because the courts have failed that this documentary um, can catch fire in part two because of the ways that he basically, Combs basically got off with very little penalty. And even though that's not the reason why 50 Cent made this documentary, but because you said it's been a long time coming, but I think there are people who are saying, well, maybe the state can't solve all these things. The juridical sphere is not going to serve us, so maybe we need another kind of accounting and reckoning, and that's where culture comes in.
It's so fascinating to think of media and PR as a pharmacon in that
Mm.
example too, because the reason this documentary is so powerful is because so much of the footage was behind the scenes footage that Sean Combs paid for because he was filming a documentary because he thought it would help him get off. So like he was doing media work that he thought would help him beat the court system. But the stuff that was the reason it didn't go forward, he thought the footage wasn't going to be good, so he refused to pay the cameraman. So the videographer let it be known that he had all this video and nobody paid him for it. And 50 Cent said, I'll pay for it. And so like the footage that Diddy paid to have made so that he could use the public relations system to dominate the courts, to win, actually ends up in this documentary now undermining whatever's going to happen when he's out of jail 50 months from now or whatever.
Oh, what a story that. Well, that's you're right. It's so nuanced about like, promotional culture, but then the kind of like the non-payment of labor, right? The exploitation of labor, and then how the pharma can bring it back in a different way that can actually be oriented at least towards some version of justice, healing, restoration, something that can I didn't know that. I didn't know those dimensions. That's incredible.
Yeah, and he was just to emphasize it, like he was sure he would be able to get away with years and years of drugging and raping people and stealing from people if he controlled the narrative, right?
Mm.
He could control the reality. He could create that reality by making this documentary, and therefore there was nothing to worry about as long as he could create that reality. and it turned out that a different reality was created with the material that he was putting together.
Wow.
But please, Michael, anybody else, please step in with anything, any thoughts, any questions. I don't want to. I'm not trying to.
Well, again, I really like the section from cancel culture to abolition, what is to be un parentheses done. It's a
Yeah.
nice play on where we always what is to be done, but really, I think Jack's starting point, and it'd be interesting for us to really consistently talk about this. I think we have a much better chance of undoing, right, the damage, right, that has been done, and we need to really focus on that because it's massive. Jack, when you weren't here, we talked about sports at length, and the kind of remasculization that took place in the 80s. Again, I'm going to periodize here, but it fit with the Reagan, moment, right? America's getting back in training. We've talked about this a lot, and how women's sports is also a form of remasculization. Traditional roles being played. You see this in the WNBA. The trash talk in the WNBA is worse than it ever was in the NBA. If you start listening a little bit and start following this in a sense. And yeah, so for me, this is very interesting how, again, capital has this ability, I use that very abstractly, but it has this ability to absorb, take in, and then react at such a level that by the time we all, like the Hegelian owl, recognize it, it's over and done with. It's with us already. I mean, did any of us think of Trump 2.0 when he first got elected? Yeah, I mean, in a sense, no, not really. Yeah, so, yeah, or that Roy Cohn would be in charge of the White House, so to speak, in a way, as the mentor. So yeah, I really find that interesting. That to me is where the discussion really is. How do we undo, this damage that has been accumulated? I mean, it's really accumulated. I've been around a long time. I mean, I grew up in the late 60s and the early 70s. I marked 73, 74 as a major turning point, at least in my life and what I was observing in many ways. And I used to joke with Stanley, you hit the high point. False promises, Jameson's Marxism in form, and Wilden's system, Tony Wilden's system and structure, were the three great things that came out of La Jolla right around Marcuse. So anyway, but all to say, this what is to be undone seems to be the very important, moment. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I appreciate that. I'm trying to think through that. Yeah, exactly. Like, where do we place? Because again, the right is happy to undo things too, right? Undo
Yes, of
any
course,
social security, and I mean, in the broad sense, right, of like
of course.
stability,
Yeah,
right? Lives, like,
right, of course.
so that kind of like, the deconstructing the administrative state, stuff that Bannon would talk about. So, and then of course the cultural side is the anti-woke, anti-cancel culture. They were like, well, we have to undo all of these meager gains by having like, progressive, barely progressive kinds of thoughts and statements circulating in the public sphere. But then at the same time, yeah, there's a whole move around abolition, not just abolishing the, carceral system, but a broader sense, right? Family abolition. So it's like, what is and so we're having these. I think partially because I mean, I don't want to be I don't want to be an accelerationist here, but what I do think is happening is that the traditional mechanisms of sort of ideological attachment, of people like in general believing or just like sort of adhering to principles that allow a dominant system to reproduce this. I think that is mostly gone. I mean, I'm sure there are some hardcore, still, I mean, even the MAGA folks, the MAGAists are not always like, they're believers, but they're still believing in a kind of like, they need to have that mythic past reactivated. It's not they believe like things are great, right? Or just like things are fine. That moment of like, well, things are just kind of fine. We just have to keep it going. Almost no one is like things are fine. So as things are falling apart, then we have this like, well, okay, well, how do we want to be almost intentional about what falls apart, and also then intentional about what's taking its place, which is a different kind of approach than let's interrupt the smooth flow of ideological reproduction. Like I think there is no smooth flow of that anymore. Not that I mean, maybe I'm being mythic about it. Maybe it once was, but it does seem like there was a moment that, that a certain kind of, a repetition doesn't have to be a mechanical one, but a certain kind of stability was in place around gender and class. But I think, yeah, the early 70s, I would also say the late 60s initiating some of those, hey, we need to undo some of these things. Early 70s, Capital says like, oh, we'll figure it out for you. Oh, women, you want some social justice? How about we move you into the workforce instead? And you can feel empowered that way. Anyway, all I have to say is like, yeah, I think that moment was it's classic crisis and legitimation again. But I think there's no kind of resuturing anymore.
Mhm.
It's like, oh, there's pacification, there can be distraction. There's much more of a kind of warfare model or militaristic model or classic, RSA stuff, not ISA, right? It's just like it's more like
Need the ISA anymore,
it's
unfortunately.
what
They don't need the
you
ISA
don't need it.
anymore. They have
Right.
the RSA completely under control. They have no need for ideology. Hence, in my
Yeah,
opinion,
exactly.
why Ellison and others are taking over. They just, yeah, yeah, yeah. They have the
That's right.
RSA completely under control. There's no
Yeah.
resistance to it. Again, yeah, yeah. Look
Yeah.
at Mondani in our neighborhood, right? In a way, he keeps Jessica Tisch as a compromise, right? In a way, yeah. We
Right. You
basically,
have to at least appease the RSA, um,
yes,
uh, and at least gesture towards it remaining a core feature of his of his governance. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, 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 yeah. So yeah, the undone thing is like, okay, well, yeah, again, like it's already being undone. So we can still say what is to be done in the midst of things being undone. Like what do we want to do in those moments to again some of it's about preservation. What do you want to keep? What do you want to like? What is the community defense that you want? That people want? What is the again creating the new in the shell of the old as it's crumbling? There might be a little accelerationism. Like okay, what do we want to continue to crumble a little more? But these are not. These are hard to kind of come up with as a coherent
right.
strategy or unity around this. And that makes it really difficult to kind of think about for me. It's like strategically.
And the institutions that have power, this is part of the problem too. The labor unions who have money, right, and have the possibility of really building that, they have no intent at doing this. The class collaboration is so deep, right, in this at this point. You know, a long time to undo. I remember growing up. We used to say it's going to take one full generation to undo Reaganism, right? Well, here we are. Two steps into Reaganism to the ultimate power in a certain way, economically at least, right? Yeah, yeah. So yeah. So the unions, I mean, what can you do? I mean, there's nothing there. David, member of the Rutgers, I'm sure you are too, and you guys went through the strike. I go through hell at LIU Brooklyn. It's a complete mess. We're the ones who were on strike all the time. We're looked up to. Now we have faculty that don't want to even get a strike authorization vote, much less a strike. Yeah, because they're afraid that they're going to get their jobs chopped by the president. Can you imagine? I mean, this is academic freedom of tenure. So I'm sorry, I'm going to, go, yeah.
No,
But again, yeah, yeah, yeah,
no.
yeah,
This is
yeah.
where we are. I mean, this is where I mean, some of us. I don't know who all is an academic on this, in this group, but yeah, certainly some of us in the states are seeing you know, um, what's happening at the new school, but it's a series of things about like no longer is it what Trump has to do to try to like coerce or I mean that kind of like contract stuff. It was attempted, it was an experiment, didn't really fly. It might have made some effort, made some inroads in a couple places, but now it's just become the crack that's opened for the old the pre-Trump neoliberal, economization of higher ed, to get in there and start its cuts,
Right.
and the fear around that. Yeah, the fear of, as you said, your colleagues.
Right.
It's just created a sense of like, yeah, intimidation. Um, so yeah.
By the way, I don't know if you know the work of Clara Mate, or you probably knew her when she was here, the economist at the New School. She moved to Oklahoma. She wrote a book on austerity and fascism, how austerity was used, and what we're witnessing today. Yeah, Mattei. Clara's her first name. Uh, yeah, very, very good on this. I personally am always looking for some synthetic ground about work such as yourselves. The political economists, et cetera, how this is working. And of course, on the ontological level, that, these encounters with planetary technology and who's controlling them and where we are. So, yeah. But yeah, I think that, bringing in this aspect of austerity is very important because that's the claim always at the university, right? In many ways, as you know, right? It's either, yeah, yeah. Yeah. And it's the new school at work right there, what they're claiming, even though it's obviously retaliation against a very active faculty in terms of the Palestinian situation. Yeah. So, yeah,
And it's everywhere, right? Like the
of course.
Montclair State is closing down their in the process of closing their main like humanities
Humanities, right?
library.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a precursor to probably shutting down the humanities department entirely. There's going to be attrition. Students and faculty are going to leave because they're shutting down resources. I was at Montclair State for 10 years up until 3 years ago. And what's happened there in the last 10 years is the business school and the media arts college have become dominant. And the business school is the business school. The media arts school has built a new building. It's where I was working. And they have amazing facilities for job training. And I mean, amazing facilities. We've got production studios. It is cool as hell. And it is very much geared towards job training and job placement after school and all of that. So like the accepted ideology, the hegemony is that schools are for job training. Like there is no real education. There's no such thing as education anymore, right? Like the word we say education, but we mean job training. And there's if anybody gets an education of the conservative, like the old conservative vision of education, if anybody picks up a little bit of that, they have to fight for it. It has to be through electives. It's got to be, it's
There was a great book. I forgot the author. It'll come to me maybe. It was called The Great Training Robbery. It came out in the 80s, early 90s, on the old train robbery, the great film about the heist in England. But anyway, the great training robbery, the great jobs, training for jobs robbery that these kids are going through. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. Somebody wrote a book called The Knowledge Factory about this. That was pretty
Yes,
good
that's
too.
true. Yeah.
um, yeah, and I just wanted to connect that real quick to the question of unions, and then like the question of why Undone and the Microfascist, I think, appears as like the right focus for the moment, because we're in like this classic argument about who the left is writing for, and we don't have a mass party we're writing for. We're not writing from that subject position. We're not really writing from the subject position of a militant labor movement because it doesn't exist. So if we're militant labor folks, that's cool, but there isn't like a moving militant. Maybe there will be, and we'll be part of it someday, but like that would be emergent. It's not there at the moment. And so at the moment, if we're to think concretely through the terrain of struggle, then it is about what's being undone and like how to manage the undoing. And it's about concretely moment to moment, like how we respond to the situations we're in, because it feels like, again, we simply don't have that movement that we can position ourselves within to then write for. So like Jack, when we all slip into the language of like, what do we need to do? And like, how do we think this through? And as always, right, the question of the we is like a real problem. And this is one of the really like difficult things to think is like how, so then we have to think about the microfascist, right? Because we can't walk down the block sign up for the Communist Party, start fighting fascism with all of our comrades, and like that's it. So it's our daily lives that we have to think about and have to begin composing from there. And right, maybe 10 years from now, the next writer on this will be looking at like an in composition movement. But right now, it's our job to kind of think about the concrete and compose it. Which I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like that's why it's so hard for us to think through like, yes, but what do we do? Because we're in a real moment of ground up composition and we don't quite know yet.
Yeah. I was just thinking about this today, and that's why I had to like get on my notes because what you were saying reminded me of like the when I hear people talking about like, oh well, what we're doing is building a new popular front. I mean, we have fascism in place, so like what we need is a pretty classic anti-fascist popular front. Um, I get it. That makes sense. It's like that's a doing that it's like, but it's missing. It's already kind of organizing rather than understanding the composition, right, of things that um, because it still seems tied to a certain kind of organizing, which is about organizations or about already existing things that then can just be put together um, to form a unified something, right, against fascism. Whereas when I think of it, and when people bring this up to me, I'm like, well, okay, I think about, what's happening locally I think I might have mentioned this the last time I was part of your group. Um, right? What's happening around the refusal and resistance against ICE in communities, right? In different places. Minneapolis, most recently, being, in the last few days, really kind of showing up for it. In addition, I think since then, it's been like the way that, I don't know if I'd call it mutual aid, but local businesses and community focused businesses showed up during the SNAP benefits, suspension when people were struggling. Like at least here in Philly, I'm sure it wasn't just here, but this is where I am, so this is what I saw. It's like, different kinds of, restaurants and bars saying like, okay, well, here, well, not bars, but bars that also serve food. Like this is what we can start doing is giving free meals to people who are on SNAP right now, but not just right now, not just during the absolute crisis moment, but like this is setting the stage because even when some version of the benefits got reinstated, they're like, hey, it doesn't mean, food insecurity is gone. It doesn't mean so there's something happening at that level. Again, a care network, you want to call it, you call it mutual aid, but something is not just bubbling. I mean, it's just like people are moving to fill in the cracks and the gaps and the crises. So what does it mean to connect those projects? I don't know if it's a front. I mean, that's a language I don't necessarily use, but I can see why people want to, create a kind of robust body, let's just say, a social body in Spinozan sense, right? A kind of a body that can withstand the attacks on it, and that it can actually expand into something else. So yeah, I think that's one way of approaching it. It's like as you're saying, like it's I like you, David. I do like taking a step back and trying to figure out what's the strategy almost. Like what is even the compositionist strategy that's possible in the ways that, the autonomists were thinking of it decades ago to think about like, okay, well, first we have to do the analysis to see what interesting things in that sense are happening. And then what would it mean to connect up struggles, projects, efforts into something, into whatever that might be. So the last chapter of the book, right, is almost not, I mean, I don't know if it's a conceptual attempt at it. Conceptually, I was trying to move into different literatures to see, well, maybe yeah, sociogenesis can help, maybe pharmacon helps. I mean, all kinds of things can, re-existence. But it was also almost like, as I kind of looked it over again today, like a parade of gestures of examples of things that are actually happening too, activist projects, movement, things that normally would not be in conversation with each other, but might have some things in common, as in the sense of again building a common notion in this, and not just in publisher sense, but in the Spinoza sense of like, so that's in some ways why, yeah, that chapter was written, is to, and again, the book is basically in the first week of January coming up. That'll be its 4-year anniversary. It came out in January of 2022. So it's been around a while. So a lot of those examples are not even are not even around. New things obviously are coming up. So it's also an attempt to say like, well, when we do these kinds of things like reading groups, what is the what can people bring? What things are people thinking about or seeing in their own communities, in the news, something that can be part of that parade, or a series of trailers almost. I felt like today I was like, oh yeah, these are thumbnail trailers also for potential like, and the anti-fascist streaming network, right? It's just like, oh, like, you like this, like this could be your portal into it, or this could be it. But the idea is to others, as they read, to think about what else they might connect it to. And I think I might have mentioned this last time, but yeah, the word has changed, folks. Their reading group, they're supposed to produce, they said they were going to at least generate a zine out of that reading group
Oh, great.
that is trying to tie some of these concepts or some of the things they read in the book to things that they're seeing or experiencing, or involved with in their own lives.
If you don't know, the word has changed is in the heart of Bed-Stuy. It's a bookstore that is really playing an active role in the community. When I went about 2 weeks, it was by accident. We passed by, driving by, and I said, "Let's stop and see Alexander," and just to see how everything's doing. And it was packed. It's really serving now as a community center. It has a local group of people who just hang out, right? And it's in the middle of it's a semi-gentrified, but at the same time, this area in Brooklyn has remained somewhat local to the Afro-American population that's been there for a long time. And they're active. They're active in the community, and you could tell by the level of the conversation. So just more things like that, because we used to have St. Mark's on St. Mark's back in the day in the village. We used to have so many little places like that. We had Tompkins Square used bookstore. He was a great guy. I forgot his name. Yeah. Anyway, we all kinds. Yeah, you remember? I used to go all the time. Yeah. Asian. He's an Asian. Yeah. Forgot his name.
I think so.
Ghani.
Right, that's right.
Ghani, that's right. But anyway, these are the kind of things too that look, Bakhtin, who brings up in a sense the carnivalesque, as Jack is talking about. We're watching the parade, and on the other hand, we should be selling postcards to the hanging of some of these people too. That'd be a nice chapter heading, I guess. But anyway, we need sites. I mean, I love it when Jack is talking about these bar restaurants that actually feed people that are getting off SNAP. Credit unions, like they used to be. And some of us know in this room that the Communist Party used to take shotguns if they were going to take your house back on foreclosures. They would take shotguns and they dare the marshals. They'd sit there like this. This is not just a thing of legend. It actually happened. And so, these kind of moments are very precious. And, this again is the problem sometimes with organizations. I have an axe to grind, of course, DSA in a sense. They've got so many members, but no sites, right? They occasionally do it, but no sites. Put the membership dues to work. We're very small, the Institute for I would be the first one to do it. We used to have the Breck Forum. We used to have the Commons in Brooklyn. And, for a little while we had the People's Forum, but, some ideological, although they like me and they like Stanley and they like other people, but not the entire group. But anyway, all to say, yeah, all to say, we need sites, to meeting grounds where we could have these conversations on a daily level. I got this book. Let's sit down. You got to read this. Look at what's going on, et cetera. What's happening in the world? Who's mobilizing in what part of the city, et cetera.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you're so right. It's just like, I think about the history of pubs and their
Right,
importance
right.
to
Absolutely.
organizing. What else do I think? When I was living in New York, right, I was connected to things like Blue Stocking, 16 Beaver, Not an Alternative, right? And of course, 16 Beaver became a key site for the folks who were working on, launching Occupy Wall Street.
Yes.
In that moment, and became a space where people could gather during it as well, off-site, off of. So all these, and a number of those are gone. I mean, Blue Stockings, RIP, right? It's just like that one was just such a stalwart in the Lower East Side for so long. But yeah, so what's happening? I mean, this is part of the move to the digital, obviously. Like people are just like kind of
Right.
organizing online, I guess,
Right.
or the conviviality part is also maybe happening online. But I mean, that's just not. It's not the same. I mean, it's just it was
The
But,
difference is,
but just to say with DSA, it's 13,000 members in New York City, and they meet all over the city every week. So if you're a member, you hear about these get-togethers for coffee or drinks
oh, good.
in every neighborhood. But to have a few physical sites would be great.
oh yeah, you see the chat,
Yes,
Jack?
Leslie. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
sure.
Great,
Uh,
great.
hi, Leslie. Oh yeah. So I love that little section because it's something I'd been working on. In some of my other work on craft culture that I had done 10 years. Now it's been like 15 years ago, where I wrote some pieces on the rise of the digital world of craftivism, but then how that was tied to um, uh, longer standing practices around women's work around weaving and anyway, but so I was very excited that I actually could bring something that I had already known about to that chapter because the other stuff I'm like, oh, I have to learn about what's happening in the world. But that one I was like, I knew about the social reproduction part too. I've been writing about that. But so yeah, I think the history and the way that Leopoldina Fortunati, writes about social reproduction, not just in the classic like Silvia Federici and other folks like the Marxist feminist way of talking about labor or unwaged labor in the household, but the way that it is a production of knowledge, of skills, of solidarities that has been going on for a long time, tracing it at some point through um, other kinds of crafts like witchcraft as well. So yes, I think for me that was like it's almost like how do I say this? Like number one, I think it'd be a really good thing when I've talked more recently about like
Right.
the archaic. That's usually a masculine war-oriented one, right? Like the archaic war bands and things. Here's another, at least pre-modern and modern practice that we can also begin to look at as something that continues. It's reshaped by capital for sure, in some way, but it's not reducible to its capitalist forms. There's something that persists across time and can be activated in different ways, in different moments, and we see that. I think I maybe mentioned it in the book, but I love seeing the ongoing reproduction of witchcraft in public. Like, suddenly like there's, a new celebrity becomes like, oh yeah, I'm a witch. It's just like the ways that there's an idea of the kind of everyday powers can be traced, can be activated that aren't the ones that are the everyday powers of domination, the everyday powers of that I would look into with microfascism, but it hasn't even necessarily been anti-microfascist. It's just been like doing its thing to produce life, that kind of cunning craft. Again, knowledge, skills, material practices, the sharing of all of that, the solidarities that come with that, the kinship structures that come with that, that to me are like almost ontologically prior, that then get that then themselves are the things that that this longer standing history of microfascism or whatever you want to call it, patriarchy, then at that point is trying to break up, reorganize, and pacify, and that it never could fully do it. Right? It continues to do it. It can never fully do it. What do we do with that? Again, there's obviously a lot of pain and suffering and harm and violence that happens with it. But what is that long-standing like historical ontology that we can look to say there's something worth uh, understanding its persistence and its reactivation today in popular culture and in culture elsewhere. So I hope that begins to address it. But I also not know if you were saying which in the is it the organization the or yeah, okay, you're typing it. Yeah, I don't know if it was just like which as um
Yeah,
um
you mentioned women inspired to tell their collective history.
yes. Yeah. Yeah, that group. I need to kind of I think there's now a new documentary about the group from the 60s um that emerged as again, they're not just like, hey, we're part of like, some, what was the name? Margaret Murray's like history of the pagan. They were like, we might draw upon that, but we are here to effectively intervene um, uh, into this moment by, how do I say this? Like what I loved about that group, it's like they're always it's the most threatening thing in some ways. If you bring women together collectively and they call themselves witches, suddenly like it stops the wheels, right? Of like so I think again some of them might have actually been practicing some of the more ancient traditions, but some of them I think were not just using the imagery but understanding the power of the image to do it. And I haven't noted it enough, but there's some new, again, either revival of that actual group or a documentary of it or something along those lines that yeah. But I have yeah. So what drew you to that, or what's
I
your
just the role of because I happen to be an older woman, the role that I can possibly play in this. Because we have our Proud Boys, we have, our micro-fascist groups in our community. And then I'm drawn to what I saw Jane Fonda do in terms of, it was an anti-Trump demonstration or something where she walked in, I mean, she's consummate performer and she walked in a red coat through this sea of blacks and grays that people usually wear, to make her point. And I think there's just some really incredibly creative things. We still have a folk fest out in our part of the world, where there is a different vibe. It's there are there's just places to I think build from that haven't gone away, that haven't disappeared, that can be mobilized. And we still have a social safety net to some degree in Canada,
was
which
that where you are?
totally which makes the world so much better. Obviously, I mean, just not to have that in with our big brother to the south of us. It's I find it just flabbergasting.
Yeah. Oh no, I know exactly. I mean, it's certainly it prevents a lot of people from, being able to find each other and to do these kind of find these sites together and be convivial because they might not have the means to do it. Or this is like constant, like, just trying to pay the rent, just trying to, or just like again, to not have the basic functions in place to be able to then like think about a better world. So I guess but the point you were making, at least maybe one of them, I mean, I think there's something, and maybe I'm just not seeing it, but it's there's not enough attention being paid to kind of intergenerational mentoring, and again the kind of the wisdom of elders. We'll just say, right, just like the one, like not just the memories that people have, but it's the kind of like the traces of militancy and understanding, how, what was that kind of memory, right? The kind of also maybe like, mistakes made, victories won. It's like all those things. I mean, I remember even during Occupy, my friend Marina Citrin was really was really focused, even in the heat of things, to say like what we also need as this youthful energy was coming up and was so exciting was also I mean, she organized these kind of I think she called them intergenerational, but just like mentoring sessions or something. It's like people by intergenerational, I mean, yeah, there might have been like a Black Panther or two, but some of it was just like the counter globalization people who were just like 10 years prior that none of these young people were at that point, the young people weren't even a part of. So it was just trying to make connections. And I don't know if there's like a concerted effort to do that. Just generally to sort of say like, oh, well, like we need to have less. It isn't always about, I mean, I'm one of those folks who's like, okay, what are the young people really? Let's look at TikTok. What's happening there? But at the same time, it's like that could also easily just get fizzle out or drift or get caught up or burn out very quickly. So what are the sustainable relationships, social relationships across generations that can be formed as a kind of part of the social body that is anti-microfascist? And and I mean, I don't. I wish I even had like an example of something that I'd seen in the news recently of like, oh, or somebody writing in a social movement, journal about it. But I think there's a place. I mean, if you're asking like, what is? I mean, it's because we've been so disaggregated in different ways, even if it's not in cities, which we know do that. Um, like finding each other is in the capacities we want to be in these functions or roles we want to provide is like it's um I mean yeah, it's hard to do. I know it's happening. It's just a question of finding it, right? And bringing it to another kind of attention. Maybe there is a kind of like another world, a strain of TikTok that might be about this, right? It's almost like anything. There's something online about everything, right? So it's about like finding the Reddit that is dealing that's bringing folks together that say like, what are you doing in your community? Skill shares. What is the skill share online that can do that? But um, um, unfortunately, I don't even think Leopoldina is writing about this anymore. Um, um, but yeah, I think in Latin America you'll find it a lot easier, right? That's the thing. Like where we are, it just doesn't have that same engagement. We being at least the folks we're talking about in the global north, um, um, it's harder to find that. Which is not to say it's gone. It's just I don't. What do you think?
We're starting to see things when you're talking about intergenerational in among our indigenous groups and the fight back there, and it's quite fabulous. And we had our Trans Mountain Pipeline demonstrations, Hug a Mountain, and stuff like that, where it brought together, indigenous and non, and working together to on an environmental issue. So I think there are. I don't want to get this sense of hopelessness that like we've lost the battle already, and I think there are places to work from. I tried to organize a meeting of the elders in the United Jewish People's Order that were communist, and couldn't get them together to talk to the younger generation about what they, like you're talking about, the lessons. And it's really unfortunate. I think there was shame that they just didn't want to talk about it. They felt that they lost horribly. And there was really nothing to talk about. And I was so frustrated because I knew some of the stories, there's a lot of humor in them, you know, and it's just so valuable. I think there's a great vein to be tapped that's out there. And I'm not sure how to connect those pieces, but I think it's possible.
I think so too. And I mean, one thing you just said also reminded me of something, we were talking earlier when David was bringing up blocks and obstacles. Like the idea that shame, right, would prevent people from saying like, hey, humorously or in a serious vein, like, yeah, this is, I mean, we tried some stuff. It might not have achieved the objectives we had, but along the way, we also found a lot of things happening. We found each other. There are ways of organizing. I mean, there are all kinds of things people learn, but I mean, to think that also that, I mean, I wonder who the shame is in front of. Like, I think younger people would be like, we don't. Shame. You did what? Like you tried. There's no failure, right? I mean, they don't even know what happened. Like this idea. So I think there would be. It's a different kind of. I mean, I think that's a fascinating thing to just dwell on for a moment. I mean, not that you have to do it, but just like, what is it for them about shame that could also be removed and be like, let's just tell some funny stories. Also, right? I mean, humor is such a part of the movements then and what's necessary now, and say like, I don't know. Yeah. So I'm really kind of disheartened to hear like people like we don't want to get together because it brings up, I mean, I guess it can bring up bad memories and people feel, I mean, there might be unresolved tensions too that who knows in those, but maybe people could, air some of that out. I mean, this is the moment of like letting this stuff like not hold on to it. Like there are bigger problems in the world than whatever we were kind of holding on to in this petty fight. Maybe that was happening back then. I'm not saying that's what they're doing, um, but I don't know. Maybe that's the Popular Front is affective first. It's like you have to get rid of this other stuff and realize you do have connections about some other things.
Yeah.
I wonder the notion of shame there is really interesting in the context. We've been talking about Bernard Stiegler a lot in Michael's groups, and in the context of Stiegler's book on care for the generations, he opens that book up with like a little vignette. He describes, I think it's a print ad with grandparents and a kid in the foreground. And the point of it, like the tagline is something like kids deserve better. And the point of the ad was that like kids deserve better than their like nerdy, out of touch grandparents or whatever. Like that was like the joke in the ad. The subtext was like, and Stiegler, like the whole book is then about this, right? And he's saying like this is the common sense within the marketing world, that like generations against one another, that like it's articulated as children exactly don't have anything to learn from the older generation, that exactly children should be embarrassed about the older generation's, I don't know, habits, like whatever. And so I wonder if one of the things that's emerging in that conversation that's general as opposed to particular to that group and how they might be experiencing shame around their particular stuff is that there's a kind of hegemonic sense of like that kind of separation, that kids don't give a shit, and they don't want to care. And so like, unless you have something spectacular to give them, then like the feeling is embarrassment or shame, or like, why am I going to present my imperfect life to kids who have already been taught and are set and are like primed to see me as already an embarrassment and not something that they need. So I wonder if Stiegler provides kind of a sort of general insight to the context within which older generations just assume that they should feel like the kids don't want to hear from them and will just like demean it or whatever anyway. And along those lines, I just wanted to connect a couple threads real quickly. Along those lines, the building of generational memory and this kind of like rearticulation of narrative and memory through a different kind of sociogenesis and its connection to place. I find fascinating. And that connection then to something like the training that the left, I think, needs in like being willing to sacrifice in conflict. One of the things that we see in microfascism is this notion that it's not afraid to die, and it's not afraid to defend its abstractions all the way to the end, and that's it. And that's like the force that's out there that's moving. One of the things we see, I think of Stonewall as an example, right? Like Stonewall, in so many important ways, ideologically, energetically, vibe wise, kicked off and like moved the queer movement, right, and the gay rights movement, and what would develop from there. And that was immediately the defense of a place that was also a generational moment, and a place that housed memories, and a place that housed relations. And so, like, I see, going back to TikTok and social media real quick, Jack, because it's really important. I see it as at least as important as you do. And like, it's materially important because there are things there that you can't find elsewhere, and that really are eye-opening or consciousness raising, or stuff like that. I mentioned a couple weeks ago to this group, I was watching the Chicago resistance to ICE, and it was one of the like diverse middle-class looking neighborhoods. And there was, the video I saw was featuring a 17-year-old kid who was like one of the captains of his community, like resistance, his block, like force. And he was one of the first people out there blowing the whistle because he saw ICE waiting outside somebody's apartment. And what you then saw was dozens and dozens of people in the neighborhood fighting. I mean, ICE was screaming at him. They beat one guy up, but the people in the neighborhood were viscerally, gutturally screaming at people. Like there was a fight going on, right? They stood up for themselves. And then it dissipates, right? And like, there's an advantage of this, Jack, that I know you've written about in other articles, the kind of composition and decomposition and recomposition. And like, there's an advantage to being able to kind of disappear and then come back together. But also, there's something about like a place that not only houses generational circuits, those long circuits that Stiegler wants to establish for intergenerational care, but also that train people that like there are things worth fighting for, that like sometimes, you got to sacrifice for, and you've got to. And one of the things that's been sticky for me for a lot of years now is, if this movement is what we think it is, then it's not going to stop on its own. There will need to be some fighting force in some fashion that has some strategy to stop it in its tracks. That's how. So like, shit, right? Like, how do we generate that necessary skill set, right? That necessary capacity, that necessary strategic praxis digitally? And I think it's really hard digitally. And I think like the need to have a space, feel that space attacked, and feel like, well, we have to defend this space, is going to be a key moment in what's going to be the progression of anti-fascist forces, however that happens in the next 10 or 20 or however many years it's going to take. I don't know what you think about that. That to me is the complication with space and digital and memory and narrative, and how these things have to kind of work together.
It diminishes space. That's the part of the problem. It basically concentrates, it's basically a spatio-temporal complex that displaces place, right? It's back to the old stuff, right? I mean, of the spatio-temporal that doesn't, yeah. So, sorry, my phone. But anyway, at least to me, I mean, I don't think it's an accident. It's called the digital Leviathan. Yeah, this is very, very important to keep in mind. What is this new commonwealth that's being created around it? And it's not a commons, as Jack refers to the commons very actively, and and of course common notions, the Moab's place, is very important. But anyway, I mean, I'll let Jack speak, but I wanted, just before we go on, to let Leslie know. Leslie, speaking of people in your neighborhood, Gord Hill has written a comic book. I'm teaching a class on the myth of the serial. Do you know him? He's in British Columbia, and he wrote a book called. I mean, it's 500 years of indigenous resistance comic book, and it ends
Yes.
with the Zapatistas and others in Canada to shut down Canada. Yeah, you should look him up and just get him to come to your meetings. And
I've heard him speak at Simon Fraser
Heard him
University.
speak. Great. Okay, I just wanted to say in case you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay, fine.
fabulous.
I'm using it as the anecdote to Superman and 16-year-old Jewish kids inventing the Ubermensch versus that of the 500 years of indigenous resistance. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
Perfect.
exactly. That's a great example. As Stonewall, as you know, and to me, like when I was thinking, probably this is probably like 6, 8 months ago. You know, when we started seeing, must even longer than that, well, the kind of anti-ICE work that was being done on the streets as a kind of community defense. It's like, no, you're not going to come in here easily and disrupt our community and take our people. Obviously, like these are flashpoints. These are physical confrontations. But to me, also, what was interesting is like, okay, well, we have that, and then we did have um, up until not that long ago, right? A version of of Afro-American communities, resistance against police incursions and police murders, right? So protection of space, defense of community, and it was the language of community defense. Like I'm still waiting, and maybe it's happening, and it's just not being discussed. I'm just even thinking locally in Philly, like that. How did those or like not just like populations, but the organizations that are tied to community defense in both those cases, like how do they link their struggles, right? And say like because at times I've seen, I've speaking of the digital, I've seen people go, I've seen Black folks go online and say basically to other Black folks, hey, this is our struggle too. Like don't sit this one out just because they're not coming to our neighborhood because they will be because they're going to come for, and they have, right, Caribbean, based migration folks. And so the ways that like that this is, but even if it's communities and geographically located communities in urban spaces, like that itself is becoming like a project of articulation, a project of creating a block across blocks, right, across city blocks, but to create a kind of counter, even a counter ICE block has been is something much. I mean, so the digital can play a role, but I don't know what community defense I mean, happens online. Like we're going to defend this channel or this Facebook group, right? Like, it just doesn't have the same, I mean, people might lament the fact that their thing gets like deplatformed, but it's not the same. They're not going to put their bodies on the line. The risk isn't the same. But what I will say though is like, and I'm thinking about myself here in this moment, right? I know that there's some fundraisers going on right now in Philly around like the inevitable, invasion that's going to happen at some point in Philly from the National Guard and from ICE in a more kind of massive way. Um, I think what also the risk for people whose community is it's not sort of immediate is like what kind of comforts are we ready to give up? Or I mean, and when I say comforts, like I'm talking about, yeah, I mean, people like myself, like, okay, well, it means I'm not going to be doing this kind of, I'm not going to tend to this work or this. It's like I have to fuse my social life also with the political activism, which I already do, but like we have to bring ourselves out of certain kind of, they're not even complacencies, they're just routines of also of how we meet and think we're being political when we meet. I'm talking about me, right? It's just like when we talk about stuff, we're just like, when are we going to be activated to also put either bodies on the line or something else, turn our homes into sanctuaries, right, as needed. So I think there's that version of the risk is not even just like which I agree with. At some point, it is embodiment and physical risk of actually the immediate moment of the confrontation. And there's also like we're also risking giving up certain kinds of lives. I'm not saying they're all comfortable lives, but the idea that well maybe yeah, I have to give up this thing, time, energy, money, my focus on work, which then leads to potential more precariousness, whatever it is, to sort of like say like, okay, well, this is the thing that also matters right now. Um, yeah, so I do think that in different how do I say, populations, worlds, it's like there's a different level of what the community defense entails and what that what the solidarity or allyship is with that. Like right now, we can be in, I mean, again, many of us are academics here. So it's like, it's not just like what's happening at Rutgers, which is not that much in some ways, right? But it's like, okay, well, but in higher ed, that's the focus now, because that's my community that needs defending. And it's like, well, yes, but then also, you know, I work mostly when it's warm. My workplace is the Italian market here in Philly in an outdoor piazza, but the Italian market is primarily Mexican restaurants and Mexican workers, and it's going to be a hot spot for ICE invasions when they do happen. And so it's like that's the community I feel like I'm already it's part of my everyday life. Even though I don't necessarily know that many people there, but it's like, but I see the everyday joys and the conviviality of folks who do live and work in the Italian market, and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I feel a piece of that anyway. But that all I'm saying is like we have to figure out like where are like yeah what the spatial what are the spaces that also have our affinities, either as work, sociality, politically, that when almost like called upon, what is yeah, what are we willing to risk in those moments? I agree. It's yeah, but
Yeah.
I, I see
No,
people have
I was just going to say back to Hegel, the master-slave dialectic. You remain the interiorized, house Negro if you don't take a risk, and the risk is, until death. And it's very important to recognize this, and, again, the Panthers being one great example of building community centers and education. I mean, I know they're held up as a legend today, but really, if you lived through that period and you knew some of those people that came out of that, I mean, this was a high-powered educational system, high-powered medical treatment for the people and thing, helped out, single moms tremendously by having a place for the kid. They had a daycare, element, morning breakfast, the best breakfast in the neighborhood, according to some, etc. So these are things that, again, I think Jack is pointing to. The models are there in some ways. I mean, it's not like we just have to invent from scratch, right? There are models, not that they might fit exactly to our situation, but there are models when this has occurred. I mean, it's all over, yeah. Uh, yeah, I mean, you have many, and the anarchist tradition gave a lot of these models too. Again, it wasn't just the communists, who did it. As Jack was mentioning, mutual aid societies and how this, yeah. So, yeah. So the struggle continues, huh?
yeah, and like it heats up at different parts and different moments, and it's like it's some of it is what do we want, again, what are we capable of? Some of the newer conditions are a different level or a different kind of disaggregation and disassociation that we have from each other because of partially the digital, partially because of material conditions of the increase in the need to spend more time working in order to get some basic needs met. But yeah, I think that those models are there, and those memories and those that, but yeah, I mean, um, and hopefully, well, not hopefully, whatever. I was going to say the book, is an attempt to sort of say what would happen if we began to see some of those models, some of those histories through this lens, and say like this is a way to aggregate some of the contemporary and the history around these are building societies, but these are kind of anti-microfascism, even if they had certain obviously problematic dimensions inside of them, gender-wise, Black Panthers we know, but like, but still, but those, but that we can find ways of, um, yeah, of reconnecting some of those.
Yeah. I just want to say what I really appreciated about the book that few people, scholars, are doing today. You go back to the work of Julia Savola, and you also bring up Mircea Eliade, both of whom had tremendous influence in various universities and were profound thinkers in their way. They were not stupid people, yeah, in a sense. Their politics were very skewed, obviously, but on another way, very, very intelligent at this regard, and et cetera. And I'm trying to figure out why conservative revolution was so attracted, to quote fascism at some levels. Junger, for example, an extremely intelligent man, went the way of National Bolshevism, through National Socialism, and then, got out of it. Pound, of course, was pro-Mussolini the whole time, arguably one of the greatest poets of the 20th century, certainly the most experimental modernist, in my opinion. And what was the attraction that was going on there too? Is enough because they were anti-capitalist. It's just not being, yeah, as you know, right? I mean, Pound wrote a book called The ABC of Money. Of economics, right? Had a whole thing about the getting rid of the money economy, well before we had let's exchanges and the North, what was the North Carolina, another experiment with other currencies instead of money. I forgot the name of that, but anyway, yeah. But anyway, so for me, I mean, this is a real contribution on that level too, that people forget, the intelligence of the right, if you want to call it that, if we still use those distinctions. Yeah, in many ways. Yeah.
Agreed, agreed.
You,
Shorthand.
you take an interesting moment, Jack, to talk about how you read those too in the book. That it's really interesting.
No, yeah, no, and I thought about that earlier today. It's like I wish I'd had more of a chance to spend more time thinking through that very thing because I think I almost use them because they're so smart, right? And I almost take them for their analytic frameworks at times to understand fascism also. Um,
Absolutely.
I mean, there are artifacts that I'm studying, like their writings are things that I'm studying, but then there are moments I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, making a pretty strong case that the Manor Bund is the actual foundation of states, right? I'm just like, okay, well, is that just a mythic moment in him, in Ivola, or is this something? How do I read them against the grain? It's tricky sometimes because again, they are sophisticated thinkers. I mean, other people have done it for Eliade. I mean, I think Carol Christ and maybe some others in anthropology read him against himself. I mean, again, because he's so prolific, but he also can bring together so many cultures. But there's a way to see the patterns that he doesn't. Anyway, but it's something. But to go to your point also, Michael, about like I don't know why back then. But more recently, I think it does go back to. I mean, this is a weird. I'm going to go on a limb on this. Like the fact that higher ed has become training, right?
Right.
And has marginalized, as you even called it, David, like the one more classical version of education. Even the conservatives will be down with that. So where does
Right.
that go? That tends to go to the think
Have a
tank.
better chance getting the humanities restored by going to the conservatives than you do to going to the liberals at this point, and even the left in some ways with the whole woke and cancel culture. In some
Mm.
way, I mean, you have to think about where
Yeah,
this really is. I mean, we should be writing letters to Mackenzie Smart. She gave away billions last year to start, alternative institutions. Maybe she'd come through. Who knows? She's married to a school teacher. She left Jeff for her high school, love, and who's a school teacher, right? In a
oh,
way.
wow.
Maybe there's a discourse there. Anyway,
Maybe
yeah,
there might be, and that may be the. I can't quite tell sometimes. Yeah, what because of the fluidity of some of the intellectual work, right? It's like again, people like I think maybe we even talked about this last time, like Christopher Rufo saying like, oh yeah, the left doesn't actually understand Gramsci. He's going to put Gramsci to use in a right-wing way, right? Or just like that their attentiveness and admiration for intellectual work as such um, found its way again through foundations, through the para-academic institutions, so they could keep that going in ways, again, through donors and billionaires who are funding these things.
Right.
So maybe there's something to be written about that at some point about that transformation of the of higher ed that's allowed the far right to really claim a certain kind of intellectual mantle, a coherent one in some ways, but also because it's eclectic in the same way. Like again, like yeah, because they're all traditionalists, this is the thing that can unite them, right? They're into the classics. Evel is just like, I'll write about Buddhism and yoga and Hermeticism, right? He would do all of these things to synthesize in a way around this idea of tradition that, you know, we modernists in our own way have yet to really come to terms with, right? And this is why I think
Good
one of
point.
the things that I think I maybe say in that last chapter is like, where is the left's orientation to ancestral
Right.
things, and that's where the witch also comes up. It's like,
Yeah.
what is the way that we could talk about? We wouldn't necessarily even call it tradition, but we might call it something else, or be attuned to something and not be so modern in our ways that yeah. So I think that to go back to yeah, the question of like the intellectual production that we're up against here too is something formidable.
Yes. No, absolutely. Yeah.
Anyone have any last thoughts? Any last questions for Jack before we
I
take
want
off?
to keep it forever. So yeah, but yeah, we really appreciate at least for me, this was a great read. I'll study it. I plan to bring up some chapters. We're going to do, like I said, we're going to do a section on psychoanalysis and Marxism in our summer school. You're more than welcome to join us in the island of Kossos. I don't know if you know Sandro Mazzaro, but he'll be
Sure.
and a few other people. So yeah, yeah, we have some of the Italian Negre people, some of the Greek commies, who have
Yeah.
continued, in their vein, as part of the faculty, and yeah. So, but anyway, I'm going to certainly use it, and so you'll get more intellectual currency out of this if you want
Oh,
to.
thanks. I appreciate that. Well, I'll make some more oils then and maybe
It's a
take a
really,
break.
really fine work and a great contribution. I know we're going to do another session on it to kind of sum it up, but this has
You are.
been helpful. In the interview, Leslie listened to it with, I forgot who it was with. David sent it out. It was only an audio, I think, but excellent in terms of explaining the book and very, very solid. Yeah, yeah.
Glad. Yeah, that's the Wretched, which is out of Ridgewood,
That's
Queens.
it. Yeah, right. Used to
Wreckage,
be
wreckage, wreckage. Um,
Antifa.
and yeah, they were Antifada and with an A, and for reasons that you might surmise, they
Right.
honestly changed the name of their podcast recently. But yeah, so I mean that's fascinating to hear. I mean, but also the other one, which is video. Maybe I mentioned this before, and Leslie, especially since you brought it up earlier about Cunningcraft. I did a conversation with Leopoldina Fortunati probably back in 2022,
That's
early.
really worth it. Right.
That was a fun one too. That one's on YouTube. Um, but Michael, I'll be in touch with you about the summer. I mean, I do plan to
Absolutely.
spend
Yeah.
part of the summer in Europe,
Yeah.
so uh, so
Leslie's been to the island. She survived the Aegean Sea. Yeah, she's doing fine. Yeah. We're right on the sea. Yeah, yeah. Good
um,
food, right, Leslie? Leslie came. Yeah, good food. Yeah. Good
Even
food.
if
incredible.
you're a vegan.
Even if
Wow.
that's right, we had to get you I remember this. Now I remember. Yeah, why we didn't have lamb a certain night.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Peter wasn't happy that he had
yes, no,
this.
of course
Yeah,
not.
that he had to worry about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. No, thank you so much. I mean, I really think it's a great contribution, and at least in my trajectory, fits extremely well with the Deleuzian Guattarian moment. And, I'm going to go back and reread three ecologies alongside this as well. Yeah, yeah. And
I really want to get back to that because like I tried to pick it up once and I was just like it was too bewildering. I just couldn't even like
yes,
but there's something there that in Guattari's work that I really want to kind of revisit and but I'm happy to be with you all and have these great questions and probes and it's got me thinking and ways of trying to make sense of this of these times that we're in too and and thanks David for organizing this and setting this up and and letting me having me come in like I'm happy to always as much as it's not always on my mind as I told David like earlier today I'm like yeah it's almost 4 years old like I go on to these other projects and then I'm like oh yeah if I'm going to talk about it I need to kind of actually really refresh because like I'm just like caught up in other stuff always kind of related but like there's some things I'm like okay what did I say in that last chapter which almost never even made it I never proposed writing it. My proposal was just the other chapters and then Malav the editor by the way the Common Notions he was like Jack I think you're going to probably need an anti-microfascist chapter and I was like oh I don't know how to write that I'm a critical work
it started in the book business at Blue Stockings.
yeah, exactly. Yep.
Right. Yeah, back in the day. Yeah, I just want to. I mean, on that note, I think that Natasha Leonard using instead of think of status as a noun or adjective, we should consider anti-fascist as a gerund, a different effort of anti-fasciating. This is a nice term. I really like this. We should be anti-fascinating. Maybe we can replace that with quote the Antifa and other anti-fasciating. That's some sexual term that's so stupid in the White House.
The algorithms won't know what to make of it. They'll never figure it out.
David,
Jack,
are we meeting next Monday, David? And which chapters are we going to focus on?
I think we're going to meet 2 weeks from now, and that'll be our last meeting, and we'll just talk about the whole book and takeaways and all that kind of thing. And then in the spring, I'm planning on doing another one. I'm not sure what yet. Maybe the new Lazzarato, maybe sections from that. I'm not sure, though.
Which is the new Lazzarato, the urgency of revolution, or
the urgency of revolution, the
intolerable
intolerable
present, the urgency of good.
Yeah, I'd
We're,
like to,
we're not meeting next Monday though.
not next Monday.
Okay,
the Monday
2 weeks.
after.
Very good.
I told you I saw Sylvia at the dentist. I saw Federici at the dentist, and I mentioned Lazzaro. The biggest smile came to you. I have not talked to Maurizio in so long, but a big smile. I think the happiest, because George is not well, and it's really sad. But anyway, yeah, but yeah, with Maurizio, yeah. Yeah, he doesn't have a full-time job. Luckily, he's, one of the smartest people of that group by far, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, Science and Machines, incredible. Love that. I mean, his book on fascism. Also, a friend of mine, Jason Wozniak, who's really involved with like strike debt stuff, wants to do some things around debt and fascism. Anyway, so we
Right, yeah,
lots of honor.
yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
But I'll be in touch with if I don't know if we're gonna if he and I are just gonna do it if we want to start a reading group or something like but let's all be in touch
Absolutely. Yeah.
It'll be an interesting semester at Rutgers too, Jack.
Another bottle of the essential oils. I'm putting it on every day. So.
We'll stay in touch through the spring and see how things develop, and I'll let everybody know here how things develop. We have a contract coming up in the spring, and so there's going to be organizing around that, and I'm going to be yelling at people because they'll be talking about the contract, and
You have a
they'll
negotiating team
get
formed
really
already?
mad at me for that, and it'll be a whole great thing in the spring.
Are you on the negotiating team? Has it been formed?
I am not. No, I broke I broke with the union with the current leadership many years ago, and I am now an outside antagonist. Is my role? They won't let me anywhere near their negotiating teams.
Sounds healthy. Do they have a negotiating team though? Yeah.
Yeah, I assume it'll look a lot like the negotiating team last time, since most of the leadership is still in place. But we'll see how it works out. We'll see how it works out. They have been very, very unwilling to organize around anti-apartheid and anti-genocide stuff because they're looking forward to the contract campaign in the spring, and they feel like they don't want to, turn off any rank and file, that kind of thing.
Classic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty frustrating.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
But anyway, that's going on in the spring. So Jack, you and I'm sure we'll talk about that, and I'll let everybody in the group know what's going on as that develops. And thank you, Jack, so much for this. Really, I really appreciate your time. It's been great to chat.
Really appreciate it. And we'll be back, studying the book again in 2 weeks. And I'm sure a lot of people will keep it on the shelf and refer to it all the time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Hope to meet you all in person sometime again. So
That'd be
again,
great.
and also some of you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. It can be arranged. Right.
Right.
You just got to get Carol out of Australia, out of that area. Leslie, I know travels. Yeah. Right. Yeah, great.
All right, y'all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Keep grading if you're grading nowadays.
Yeah.
And Beryl, we're going to meet a week from Tuesday too. We're not going to meet tomorrow night.
Yeah.
I'll send out.
So we're not meeting tomorrow.
I thought Bruno would be a good guest. He's traveling tomorrow. He leaves actually late on Wednesday, so I thought it'd be good to have his presence. So I'll send that out too. And I'm really glad we have this going alongside the Stiegler, because it really opens up many, many good questions, as David has mentioned tonight, the taking care of generations, the intergenerational transmissions, and of course, what I think we're all fighting is Stiegler's term, the systemic stupidity that we're facing at every front. That's the real enemy to me. On the ideational, and the confrontation needs to be done. Yeah.
That's how he closes. Which one is it? It's his little one. Whichever. He closes one of the two smaller books, saying the fight against stupidity is what makes life worth living. Right? Like that.
There you go. I agree with that. Gets me out of bed in the morning.
All right, I'm out of here. I gotta go. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Beryl. Thank you. Thank you. Bye, Leslie. Jacob.